Good evening from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Now, this was the week that the UK Prime Minister Theresa May lost her vote, lost her voice, and lost control of Brexit. Now, what does that mean for the UK and the rest of Europe? Here are the highlights of the week, in case you missed it. There may be more bad news to come for the UK's embattled Prime Minister Theresa May. In just about 2 hours, she faces another crucial vote. Now, this time on taking a no-deal Brexit off the table. The UK and the rest of the EU were left to reflect on after another humiliating defeat for Theresa May, after her Brexit deal was crushed by an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons last night. And in case you needed a reminder, there are just 16 days to go before Britain leaves the EU. And there's still barely any sign of compromise on anything on either side of the channel. Right here in Strasbourg, anticipation of tonight's vote, reaction to last night's defeat, and the prospect of a Brexit extension dominated the day. Let's take a look.
I don't see any better solution than the withdrawal agreement with all the clarifications given. So now this is where we are. Of course, we will remain in this position to want to do as little harm as possible in a very harmful process, because Brexit is very harmful to the United Kingdom and to the European Union.
Again and again and again, we are discussing in the European Council mainly about Brexit and not about China, not about the trade to Trump, not about the real issues which are important for the citizens of this European Union. That's why we cannot continue like this.
Let's stop bashing London. There are experts in this House who continuously bash London. Here's one, Mr. Farage. There's one, Mr. Verhofstadt. There's no difference in their approach, in their criticism to London. Secondly, I think it is time that the Commission finally admits that they have some responsibility for Brexit.
It seems to me that Britain seems to be spinning out of control instead of being back in control. And I think that the only reasonable way, Mr. Henkel, to solve this problem, and you didn't talk about that, unfortunately, is that there is cross-party cooperation in British politics, the fastest as possible, a compromise, a common view between Labour and the Conservatives. How you want to solve an existential problem like Brexit if it is used by both parties to kill each other? For them, Brexit is a bullet in a weapon.
Today we are in the hands of the British political system. They should tell us where they want to go from now. The solution will have to come from London.
We've had enough. We've seen the snarling anger towards our country of Mr. Verhofstadt, the bureaucratic intransigence of Mr. Barnier, the constant stream of insults that come from Mr. Tusk, and we're of one mind. We don't want to be governed by you.
Now, Europe's chief negotiator was also outspoken during that debate, saying the treaty negotiated this week is the only treaty available to the UK. And following the debate, Michel Barnier sat down with Euronews' political affairs programme, Uncut. Here's part of that exclusive interview with Daniel Cohn-Bendit.
Do you believe in any deal after all what happened? Frankly, do you believe in a deal?
But the point is to know what the UK wants. It is my answer to this question depends clearly on what the answer of the UK side, what they want. If they want to leave the EU in an orderly manner, if they want to leave the EU as decided by the Brexit referendum in an orderly manner, that means that this treaty is the only one possible. The only deal.
Can you renegotiate something?
No, we can't.
Page 120.
No, we cannot renegotiate because it's not our document. It is a common agreed document with the UK government. So it is the best and the only deal possible if the UK wants to leave the EU in an orderly manner. The other option is to leave without a deal. In that case, this document will be no longer useful. But my personal feeling as a negotiator is to protect the interest of the EU side, the EU business, the EU citizens, the EU local communities, the farmers and so on, and also in the interest of the UK side. We need this deal because it's the only way to organize and to limit the consequences of the Brexit.
But what will happen now? They said they refused the deal, they refused the agreement on the agreement on the agreement, they refused everything.
Generally speaking, Daniel, I do not like the speculations and the speculators. So I don't want to speculate. Let me just say that now the impasse where we are has to be solved by the UK side. Huh?
And which sign did I give you?
No, they are waiting for a new vote tonight and a third vote tomorrow. The second vote will be about to vote against the no deal.
Yes.
Okay, and tomorrow to ask for a prolongation of the negotiations. And the answer for the EU side will be immediately for what?
Yes, but for what? You know, prolongation. I can't understand. I'm a EU citizen. Prolongate for what?
It could be a technical prolongation because if the deal is voted, they need some more weeks to implement.
But then they vote the deal.
Okay, they have to first of all to vote the deal. It is a prerequisite. Could be a tactical, a political prolongation. In that case, I know the answers and the reaction of the EU side, the EU leaders, the EU Parliament. What for? Why do you need a prolongation? So it is for organizing a new referendum, new elections or not? I cannot answer to this question at the place of the UK government.
But we have a problem. We will have the election, European election. But can you imagine organizing an election in Great Britain for the European Parliament because they have to leave?
The only point is, at this stage, the answer to the prolongation will be the responsibility of the EU leaders by unanimity, European Council, next week or a little bit later. The only legal point I want to mention, to inform you, is that if the prolongation is long enough to go after the European election end of May, at that moment, at that time, the UK will be a member state with all the rights and the obligation of a member state.
So they will be obliged
in particular, let me just mention this point, in particular to protect the citizen rights of the EU citizens living in the UK. And these citizens have the right to vote. The same for the British citizens in EU. So if the UK will be at that time member of the EU, it will have to organize the European election.
Well, you can watch the entire interview with Michel Barnier tomorrow night on Uncut with Daniel Cohn-Bendit. That's at 10:30 p.m. CET on Euronews. All right, joining us right now in the studio with some reaction is Nigel Farage, British MEP from the Brexit Party with the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy Group, and Marietje Schaake, Dutch MEP with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. All right, I'll start with you, Nigel. This is what Mr. Barnier was holding up there.
Yeah.
The deal. It's final.
No,
it's not going to change.
Let's just get this right. It's not a deal, it's a treaty. And this is something that's been underestimated. So what the House of Commons was asked to do last night was to vote to leave one treaty to sign up to a new treaty. And this treaty, in many ways, would have bound the UK in. It would have meant taxation without representation. Even the Lisbon Treaty had Article 50 within it, by which we could leave. With this, there was actually no way out. So the House of Commons was quite right to reject it.
And that's the best that the UK is going to get from the EU. Do you believe that?
Monsieur Barnier's intention from day one was to keep the United Kingdom as closely tied to the EU single market and customs union as he possibly could. He's led the Prime Minister, cleverly, down the garden path, and we have said no to it. Now, I think logically, in the short term, the only way Brexit gets delivered is we leave on WTO terms. In the longer term, I think what we all want, really, is a genuine free trade agreement, but not membership of a political club, and that's what that document did.
Marietje, this is the best deal that is going to come out of the EU. We saw a last-minute, last-ditch effort from Theresa May. None of that is going to happen. I think Michel Barnier has made that clear. And you think that, indeed, this is it. This is the last night. If the UK doesn't accept this, they're not going to get anything more.
This is the best deal that's on the table. It's been negotiated by Mr. Barnier, but on behalf of 27 sovereign states versus one state that is in complete disarray. And I think it is true that this is what's available. The clarifications have been given. The addendum has been given. More is not possible. So let's see what comes out of London tonight. And then what the consequences will be. Because if people don't want a no deal Brexit. They don't want this withdrawal agreement. Then maybe they don't want Brexit.
Well, the interesting thing is this. There's a very big difference between what the people want and what Parliament wants. It's perfectly clear.
You don't think Parliament represents the people?
No, not at all.
Oh.
And that's the fascination of where we are now. 77% of MPs voted Remain, and nearly all of them still maintain that position. So there's a really big disconnect opening up here. What is obvious tonight is that the UK Parliament will vote to take no deal off the table, although, and this is crucial, it doesn't change the legislation that is still in effect, so we still could leave on those terms.
But why not do a second referendum then if you don't think the Parliament represents the people?
Well, it doesn't at all, no. And that's why we had a referendum in the first place. And the frustration, the annoyance, is they are willfully not carrying out the will of the people. But what's happening in the country is really interesting. And that is that now, no deal is by far the most popular option. You know, the last opinion polls, about 45% want to leave with no deal. And I can't see, unless there is going to be a complete betrayal of the Brexit vote by the UK government and Parliament, that we can do anything else but simply
Nigel,
leave in 16 days' time.
You would rather a crash out?
No, I'd rather leave.
Yeah, but that would mean a no deal, which would mean
I'm sorry,
crash out.
you are using words like crash out. I'm using words like clean break, independence. So you can view this how you want to. Actually, and here's the truth of it, I mean, we today were voting on a lot of legislation, getting ready for a no-deal Brexit, in terms of banking, flows, aeroplanes. Most of those scare stories are out of the way, and I don't think there's much to fear, frankly.
You say it's scarce. I'm going to get to you, Marietje, but you say scare stories. But we're talking about assurances that the UK wants from the EU. What assurances can you give to the people of the United Kingdom that this leaving nicely, as you would put it, is not going to cause economic chaos? They're not going to suffer from a
We'll be leaving the European Union, we'll be leaving the single market and leaving the customs union. And they are all the things that we debated ad infinitum in the referendum, the biggest democratic exercise in the history of our nation, and we made a decision. We backed it up in a general election, 85% of people voting for parties that supported respecting the result, and then 500 MPs voted for Article 50, which says we leave on the 29th with or without a deal.
Marietje, what do you think of what Nigel is saying on this point, that people in the UK actually want a no deal, that is the best option for them?
Well, you know, I'm surprised to hear on the one hand that the referendum was the biggest democratic exercise ever. On the other hand, that the Parliament doesn't represent the people, even though the elections actually confirmed the Brexit.
Because they lied.
Well, there was a lot of lying going on, wasn't there?
They said they would respect the result, and they're not respecting it. It's quite simple.
Okay, Marietje, what about extension? What about the view of extending this from the EU's point of view?
Yeah, well, I mean, extending for what, I think is the key question. If you look at the chaos that we see in London now, the disagreement, only agreement on what people don't want, then you have to ask yourself, what would the real question be? And what would the reason for extension be? And then also there has to be unanimity for that. And I think one question would be is, have you talked to, for example, your friends in Italy, asking them to veto that kind of extension?
I think what's interesting, without me doing that, is I was quite shocked this morning. I was quite shocked meeting Monsieur Barnier and the Conference of Presidents. There's been an assumption in the UK that if we ask for an extension, the EU would just say, yeah, that's fine.
Well,
what I was getting today...
We don't know that.
No. I'm saying I think we're wrong on that. What I got today was a very strong impression, and it backs up what you're saying.
I'm asking you whether you've asked your Italian friends about it.
I think
I'd be very happy for it to be vetoed. Very happy indeed.
I think the question of the extension of Article 50, as you were both pointing out, we would like to know what the rest of the EU thinks about that, because, you know, there's a lot of questions on whether it should be a short kind of extension or a long kind of extension. All right, we did try to find out what MEPs here in Strasbourg thought about that, about extending the Brexit deadline. Our correspondent, Shona Murray, went out to talk to some of them here in Strasbourg, and she's joining us now live. So, Shona, what is the mood from MEPs that you talked to about an extension?
Well, I think, first of all, when you speak to some of the MEPs, they were expressing their frustration at the level of the defeat last night in the House of Commons. There had been some optimism that perhaps Theresa May was able to get this re-engineered withdrawal agreement across the line. After that, the next question on their lips was an extension, the inevitable nature of a request for an extension and what that would look like and whether they would consider supporting it. And they said they would, many of them, depending on for what it was for. Emotionally speaking, they said they want to get, finished with the business of Brexit as soon as possible, because it was, creating an obstruction in terms of the European Parliament elections. But they mostly said they would be willing to give the UK an extension just to prevent a no-deal scenario. So take a listen to what they said.
If the UK want a substantial period of time to set out a new approach, I think we should give them that time. Irrespective of the European Parliament election, that's a secondary issue for me. What's more important is to see if we can resolve this issue in a timely way.
We have to find a way to come to a solid solution. And Theresa May should, and that will be asked by the European heads of state and government, she has to demonstrate in which way she would like to guarantee to find a solution.
Giving them some extra weeks, if that could do anything to at least see to that we've tried all possible options, it would be reasonable to do it.
I think we all would agree that every possibility at all should be given to the British, even an extension if so. But what we really need now, as in really need now, is to have some kind of justification for this extension.
Honestly, if we are going for an extension, I believe that if it is a short extension, I think it's pointless because we will end up going around in circles, as I have seen happening in the past days, weeks and months. But if it is a longer extension, then everyone needs to understand what would be the purpose of a longer extension.
The question is, what kind of an extension would they give into? If it was just a few more weeks to get the withdrawal agreement across the line, I think most people would be quite reticent to approve that because there wouldn't be anything clear that would have changed in terms of the circumstances in the House of Commons. If there was a request, if the UK decided to change its red lines, perhaps Theresa May spoke to the SNP and the Labour Party, then there's definitely an open-mindedness for that. Talks of a 21-month extension creates its own major complications with regard to the European Parliament and the impact on that. But definitely, even though there is frustration, you could definitely get a sense that there's pragmatism, that MEPs, no matter what side of the divide they're on, do want to help the UK. Because, of course, the impact for no deal would be huge on the European Union, not just economically, but also in terms of citizens and in terms of the relations between the two sides in the future.
Let's go to tonight's raw moment, which comes from a fiery debate at the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, where MEPs reacted to a possible Brexit extension. Let's take a look.
And the only thing what we will do, we will give a new mandate to Mr. Farage. That's the only thing what we're going to do. That's exactly what he wants. Why he wants that? For two reasons. First of all, he can continue to have a salary that he can transfer to his offshore company. And the second thing is that he can continue to do his work, dirty work in the European Union, that is to try to destroy the European Union from within. That is the real purpose.
Well, there you go.
I think as much as they appear to dislike each other, and I'm sure they do, they are great sparring partners, Guy Verhofstadt and Nigel Farage. And I think deep down, there's probably a little bit of admiration on each side. Because, you know, they are two very colourful characters in the European Parliament with very different views.
Exactly. Maybe two sides of the same coin, you can say.
Potentially. You said that. You said that, not me. What's your impression of what Geoffrey Cox has said today? Has he killed off May's deal?
He's held it below the waterline as far as I can see. He's clearly been determined to stick to his word. He said that he wouldn't change his opinion if he didn't feel that the risk had lessened of Britain being able to get out of the backstop, as it were. And he doesn't think that risk has lessened, and therefore he's said what he said, which is to, I think, make it impossible for the ERG and the DUP, if they are to be true to their word, to support it.
We vote tomorrow on whether we should crash out without a deal, which would be catastrophic. I don't think Parliament will go anywhere near that. And if that's voted down, then we have the issue of a postponement. But that begs the whole question, what's the postponement for? Simply perpetuating this argument isn't about the existing deal, takes us nowhere. I would argue we've got to go now to the country, and the Prime Minister's got to test her deal with public opinion as against the option of staying in the European Union. In other words, a referendum.
Nothing's changed. And instead of focusing on the substance of our future relationship with our European partners, such as education, jobs, the economy, all these things that will be worst hit by Brexit, We're talking about process and tinkering with a deal that doesn't really mean anything to jobs and to people out there.
I think the European Union's given us a thoroughgoing punishment beating. I think they've been extremely difficult, intransigent all the way through. They've given us absolutely nothing whatsoever, and I despise them for it. The way they've handled this negotiation is precisely why we want to leave the European Union. These blighters think they're pretty clever fellows. We Brits are going to show them they're not.
The UK will slash tariffs on almost all of its imports to zero in the event of a no-deal Brexit. That was the message from the British government today as it tried to calm fears of surging inflation and a no-deal economic shock. Now, there would also be no new border checks on goods moving between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Let's take a closer look at the UK's new trading plans. Tariffs on 87% of all goods would be slashed to zero. That would still leave 82% of EU imports tariff-free, down from 100%. However, there would be new tariffs on a number of industries, including agriculture, beef, dairy, and the automotive industry. What will this mean in practice, though? Fully furnished cars imported from the EU would be subject to a 10.6% levy. All right, Britain's Brexit Minister Stephen Barclay defended the new tariffs this morning and denied that Northern Ireland would be treated differently to the rest of the UK. Let's take a listen.
No, what we've done is we've announced temporary measures, a modest liberalisation. At the moment, it's 80% of our trade which is on zero tariff. It will move to 87%. We're going to obviously listen to businesses in terms of what the impacts of that are. But these are the real-term consequences of the vote in the House of Commons last night. It does impact business. It does create uncertainty for business, and that is damaging to jobs of your viewers.
And it did not take long for the EU to hit back at that. Let's have a listen to what the chief spokesman of the European Commission, Margaritis Schinas, had to say about the tariffs.
The differential treatment of trade on the island of Ireland and other trade between the EU and the UK raises concerns, and in the event of no deal, the Union has already made clear that it will apply its normal third country trade regime to all trade with the United Kingdom, and accordingly charge MFN tariffs on imports from the UK into the EU.
And joining us to discuss this is Irish MEP with the European People's Party, Sean Kelly, and still with us is British MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformist Group, Dan Dalton. All right, I will start with you, Sean. After all of the political wrangling and focusing on the votes of the day, are we actually staring down the barrel of what is the biggest issue here when it comes to trade tariffs, business, and how will it affect the lives of ordinary people? Let me just quote Carolyn Fairburn from the Confederation of Business Industry, and she said, "This is the biggest change in terms of trade since the mid-19th century." That is a massive thing.
It is, but we're staring down a lot of barrels at the minute because a lot will depend on what happens in the vote tonight, what happens subsequent to that. So I think issuing statements like this at this particular time, while they may be helpful in the sense of creating some type of certainty for British businesses, the reality is that this is a two-way street. Goods come into the European Union, goods coming into the United Kingdom from the European Union, they'll have to sit down and work out a parallel regime, an equitable regime, and the European Union is not going to change its rules in relation to third countries without having an opportunity to work out a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. So this is, I think, a lot of scaremongering in the broader sense, in European terms, trying to make the people at home in the United Kingdom feel comfortable. And in relation to Ireland, we're not really sure.
Is it scaremongering? I mean, we look at the figures, we're looking at tariffs, either going up or going down, depending on the industry and how it would affect businesses. Is it scaremongering, or this is very real now? It's as real as it gets?
But the UK has got to prepare for this. I mean, we are 2 weeks from a potential no-deal scenario. Now, it's my view that no deal will not happen, so hopefully this is all hypothetical. But the reality is we've got to have a tariff schedule ready, and this is actually quite a big liberalisation in some ways, but also not a huge liberalisation. I mean, it's only from 80% to 87% of goods now that are tariff-free. Many of them are very small tariffs anyway, less than 5%. So it's not a huge liberalisation. And what they've tried to do, I think, is pick out those really specialised industries that really need some protection and quite limited, some agricultural products and cars, and wherever possible, be as liberal as possible on all of the
So
others.
this is not scaremongering, as Sean was saying. This is planning from your point of view.
In my opinion, it has to be done. The impact and the way it's reported might end up like that, but the reality is it's got to be done.
It's got to be done. All right, let's hear from somebody, though, who would be directly affected by these tariffs. Thomas Cooney farms beef and dairy in Ireland, about 15 kilometres from Northern Ireland, and he's joining us now via Skype. Thomas, all right, we really would like to know how these, tariffs would affect people like you. When you heard about the announcement today, we knew it was coming when you saw the figures. What is your reaction?
Our reaction is it would have a detrimental effect on our business. Basically, 50% of everything that's produced on my farm in beef and dairy, 50% of it goes to the UK. And there's huge concerns among other farmers in other sectors. You have lamb and pork and poultry is being talked about as well. It's a huge impact because there's 300,000 jobs at stake in rural Ireland at this, and those 300,000 jobs need to be protected. They would be put in jeopardy because 50% of our product go into the UK, and we would need the EU to stand behind small countries like Ireland if this happened. And there would need to be a robust solidarity fund put in place to tide us over until we find alternative markets, which wouldn't happen overnight. So it's very worrying times for Irish farmers, and we'd be saying that it's time for the EU to stand together on this one and support us.
Yeah, Thomas, I understand the worries of our Irish farmers, but the negotiations have been going on for 2 years, and this was one of the possibilities that was being looked at. What did you do to prepare for an eventuality like this, now that it could be real?
We have been liaising with our Taoiseach, with our Prime Minister, and we have been lobbying the EU Commission. We've been lobbying MEPs there like Sean. Look, there's so much of it was out of our control. That is the problem. All we can hope for at this stage is that, as Sean said, that there is some provision put in place that we will be able to trade, and we will be asking for those tariffs not to be implemented, that we would still have direct access to the UK market. That's what we have been looking for all along. Ideally, what we would want is continued access to the UK market. If that doesn't happen, if there's tariffs put in place, it's going to leave us uncompetitive. We're not going to be able to produce our food at that cost and pay the tariff on it. It wouldn't be viable. So if we don't get access to the UK market, we must have the EU must stand behind countries like Ireland. This is a time where the EU needs to stand together. We can't do it on our own. We need the EU to stand behind us on this one.
Well, I do want to ask you one more question. Because we are looking at between 50 and 60% tariffs on maybe beef, dairy, and those products. How long can you personally sustain your business if these tariffs came into place? How long before you say, I'm in danger?
It wouldn't be very long, because this has had an effect on beef prices already. Because there is with the way sterling is at the moment, it's having an impact already. It's leaving the markets nervous as we stand. So we would need funding supports put in place immediately. We wouldn't be able to stand it very long.
All right, thank you for that, for joining us tonight. Thomas Cooney, he owns a farm just 10 miles from the border there, the Irish border. All right, let's talk about that. I mean, I think they're one of the biggest groups that would be affected. What do you tell people like Thomas Cooney now that we're very close to what possibly could be a no deal?
Well, I've said all along that I think there will be a deal. I think if the United Kingdom votes, and I expect they will vote tonight, not to leave without a deal, that will take some of the pressure off. And then we will have to try and work out what is going to happen. Anything could happen.
But they're already feeling the pain, as you say.
Yeah, and I think this actually brings stark reality to what actually could happen. Obviously, from the European Union point of view, I will be ensuring that they will stand 100% behind Ireland, make available all the instruments that can help them in the event of a serious crisis, which there could be, things like intervention, market supports of different kinds, and also probably a weakening or a lessening of the state aid rules.
But isn't the point market liberalisation? That the UK wants to, to trade freely around the world, and if you're talking about intervention, I mean, that defeats purpose.
Well, this is the point. I mean, the tariffs that the UK is proposing to put on EU beef and the beef from the farmer there are much less than the tariffs the EU is proposing to put on UK beef. So the only way you can avoid this situation is by getting a free trade deal or getting some sort of deal that can be imposed. Otherwise, the UK would have to apply its tariffs, if it offered the EU something special, to every other country in the world, which would cause the same problems for UK beef farmers. So, yeah, we want much more free trade, much lower tariffs, but the EU is proposing to put on much heavier tariffs on the UK than these ones that the UK are proposing.
We have time for tonight's Raw Moment, which comes from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, where Jean-Claude Juncker was welcoming the Prime Minister of Slovakia, but it seems he had other thoughts on his mind. Let's take a look.
Buongiorno, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, dear Peter. Je vais vous confier un secret. J'ai peu dormi cette nuit à cause de Madame May. Mais suffisamment longtemps pour pouvoir rêver de la Slovaquie et de Bratislava.
He was just being cheeky there, wasn't he? Jean-Claude Juncker. You do expect comments like that from him. What's your reaction?
Well, clearly Jean-Claude has his reputation.
It's open to interpretation, and David is just laughing.
That's what he's like.
From Germany to Poland and even back in Brussels, there are signs that identity politics will play a bigger than ever role in the European Parliament elections coming in May. Now let's take a look at tonight's ballot buzz. It was last week. France's Emmanuel Macron set out his grand vision for Europe. Now, not to be outdone, Angela Merkel's anointed successor, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, is setting out her roadmap for the bloc. And with migration firmly on the agenda in Germany, she's joined Emmanuel Macron's call for secure external borders, adding that Europe needs a border police force. Meanwhile, the man bidding to be the next Commission President, EPP lead candidate Manfred Weber, has announced that half of his team of commissioners would be women. Taking to Twitter, he praised women's flair for compromise. And in Poland, a fight over gay rights after the mayor of Warsaw signed a declaration to protect LGBT+ rights, including the introduction of sex and tolerance education into the city's schools. The ruling Law and Justice Party came out fighting this weekend. Speaking to party faithful, leader Jarosław Kaczynski branded his rival's agenda an attack on children. From migration to gender and gay rights, it seems identity politics is firmly on the agenda for this year's European Parliament elections. And joining me to discuss, among other things, identity politics as part of our election coverage here on Raw Politics, we have Elmar Brok. He is a German MEP from the European People's Party, as well as Linnea Engström. She's a Swedish MEP from the Greens EFA group. All right, we were talking about identity politics there. One could argue that it's always been a part of politics. You know, people relate to something that they identify with. But why does it seem much more important in these elections, the upcoming European parliamentary elections, and the stakes seem higher? Elmar.
Look, I think identity is always a question of politics. I'm not sure that this is more important than in other elections. It's always the identity which people have to recognize, whether politicians meet their identity. That is always a secret of communication between politicians and citizens.
You don't find populists are jumping on issues that magnify identity politics in order to get votes?
To be right-wing, against migrants,
there you go,
against neighbors. Is that identity policy? It is the opposite of identity. The opposite of identity, I think. And therefore, I believe identity is that a nation, a region, groups of ethnic people have their own identity, which in a plural society have all their rights to live and have the possibilities to say what they want, and they agree on that, what they want. And this, I think, is the question. And the definition of identity should not be given by the right-wing people.
Because we even have...
They destroy identity.
What do you think about that? Because
no, I think that's very, very adequately put. I mean, this is really about empathy, about human rights. I don't know why we lack empathy in the Union today. I get horrified when I see in the middle of Europe, Polish, on that level, on the highest political level, people are questioning LGBT rights. I mean, these are our common values. These are the values that we built this union on. So I don't know why we lack empathy in this
But
sense.
it is being used as a basis for drawing battle lines in the elections.
We don't have to like each other's religion, or I don't have to like your lifestyle or your sexuality, but I have to defend every human being equal rights. I mean, that's what it's really about, and that's what we built our union on. And because of very, very good reasons, because of people challenging every single human value, equal value. So I think it's, I'm surprised, and I think we have to fight against it fiercely.
We should not allow the right-wing people to identify what identity is.
Exactly.
It's not their job.
Exactly.
It's the job of everyone.
How do you stop people from identifying with identity politics, as you say?
They don't accept that. They have no right to do so. Everyone has the right to look for his identity. But please do not leave the definition of identity to the right-wing people.
I think they're using like contempt and sort of fear-mongering to build this kind of stereotyping. I mean, let's face it, we are human beings. We have a tendency of stereotyping the other. But that's just a very simple way of, I think we have to challenge it with facts, always with facts, by standing with our human rights, and always saying that this is our union. There is no place for racism. There is no place for challenging LGBT rights or women's rights or all of that.
Yeah, on women's rights, like Manfred Weber, he was now talking about gender parity and highlighting this issue. Is that a strategy, like to get votes, or why? Why would he be doing that?
Look, we have changed in our society, and everyone has to adapt to. But everyone has also the right to have different opinions on that. I think that is not these rights are going in the same direction. Because of religious reasons, I might have another opinion than others to that question. But it does not mean on one side that you live after such standards or what you should allow in a plural society. There's two different laws. I do not like, for example, homosexual marriages as a Catholic, but I would like to allow it in every state, because there is no right in a modern state to discriminate.
Exactly.
That is my own opinion. I have to divide it between that.
But with gender parity, I think I saw that pledge that he did on gender parity, and I think that's very good. I think women's vote will make a huge difference in this election, and just because of right-wing
populist. Is he appealing to his base?
I hope he does. I hope we have more women voting in the European election, because usually the voter turnout is quite low in most member states. So if we have a higher percentage of women going to the polls, that might make a severe difference.
And there's something, and one other thing I wanted to touch, which we mentioned in that ballot buzz. It's AKK in Germany. She's trying to position herself, it seems, to create her own identity and create her own image separate from Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron. Is she doing a good job?
No, she does, but she has other background. She's a more to southern, western Germany Catholic person, and Angela Merkel is the eastern, northern German Protestant.
Okay.
This is totally different.
What is the difference? So what can we expect from someone like AKK?
AKK is classic Christian democratic policy in Germany, like Helmut Kohl. That's another story. And it's a nice thing to have this differentiation. I love it that we have this differentiation in our party. And that is, I think it's a very good development, but in the principles we agree to.
Right.
In all the principles, Mrs. Merkel and Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer agree each other, and that is a good thing. But if there's a differentiation in third question, it's a fine way to do so.
And actually, Miss Kramp-Karrenbauer, she was also trying to push back against Macron. Agree, but push back a little bit as well. So what will happen to the German?
I discussed it with her also today. Look, when Mr. Macron made the proposals, when someone makes a proposal, you have not to agree from the next day on every detail of it.
Clear.
But if you read it well in both directions, it goes in the same direction. But there's a differentiation, but she makes some extra proposals. He has not yet agreed to. That is discussion.
And they're both laying out their visions for Europe, essentially. All right. Now, a politician launching a fight against fake news. Well, you think you've heard this one before, but no, you probably have not. Let's take a look. Welcome to Bologna, the northern Italian city famous for its culture and cuisine. But if you're thinking about sitting down in one of the city's restaurants and ordering some spaghetti bolognese, you might have the mayor on your back, because Virginia Merola is on a mission to stop hungry tourists from thinking that Bologna is the birthplace of spaghetti bolognese. He's taken to Twitter, branding the culinary classic spag bol fake news. Instead, he wants his city to be renowned for the dishes it did invent: tagliatelle, tortellini, and lasagna. One thing's for sure, the association between Bologna and spaghetti bolognese is one which could prove hard to untangle. You really feel strongly about this and the fact that he called it fake news. I mean, what do you think about that?
I just get very hungry. I mean, those dishes that look...
Are Swedish meatballs actually Swedish? I don't know. Are they?
Sorry, what?
Swedish meatballs, I was just thinking.
Of course.
Oh, they are.
That's,
okay.
That's the best.
I mean, what's interesting is that this now fake news is attached to everything, even something like spaghetti bolognese.
I think I would like to have the problems this mayor has.
Why not?
Yeah.
The German government has warned its citizens about traveling to Turkey, saying that they could be arrested for expressing opinions that are tolerated at home. Now, it changed their travel advice after the Turkish government expelled 3 journalists without giving a reason. The ZDF television journalist Jörg Brasse is one of those journalists, and he and his colleague left Istanbul this weekend and arrived home in Germany last night. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the Turkish government.
I think this decision is wrong. It's causing more damage for Turkey than it does for us or for ZDF or any other media. The Turkish government managed to more or less silence national media. They're now trying to do it with international media, and we should not submit to that.
All right, let's have a look at that new travel advice given out by the German Foreign Ministry. So let's take a look at what it says. It says it cannot be ruled out that the Turkish government will take further measures against representatives of the German media and civil society institutions. So that was the message of the travel advisory given out by the German government. All right, here with us to talk about this is Ana Miranda. She's a Spanish MEP with the Greens EFA group, and Stephen Wolf, the British MEP, independent MEP here at the Parliament. All right, what is fueling this, if we can use the word aggression or more aggressive tone by Turkey?
For us, it's an erosion of the rule of law. It's a lack of freedoms and a lack of the freedom of speech. And at the moment, also a persecution to all the different ideas of different to Erdogan. Academics, journalists, politicians, women. We have seen last 8 March how was repressed the demonstration of women there. And we have also a big erosion of the rule of law. It's for that we are very worried.
Why do you think he's feeling, why do you think Erdogan is maybe being a little less careful when it comes to going against what the EU sees as against its values?
Because he has power. First of all, with the European Union, he has power of control of whether he can open the doors and allow millions of Syrians and other migrants that are currently resting in his country, and he can allow them to flood Europe, and that's what he would do, and he's threatened to do that, and we begged him not to by giving him 6 billion euros. He also has power because he knows that in northern Syria he's worked with the Americans to carve out a part of Syria for himself, lots of the olive groves, parts of the gas, parts of the opportunities that are up there, and he controls that area. So he knows also that by aligning himself perhaps with Russia, being less aggressive as the West, he has power and influence over Europe, the United States. So he's daring everybody to say, come and tell me what to do, because this is what I will do if you do.
I mean, to that point, because Anna, you're saying, yes, we're very worried about the erosion of rule of law, but as Stephen is pointing out, that it seems like the EU's hands are tied. What can you do? You need Turkey for dealing with terrorism, dealing with the migration. So what is the EU to do?
No, the problem is the persecution and the erosion of the rule of law. I have here an important document because it's the letter that has sent Mr. Demirtas, the leader of the HDP, to me, because I was there in December with the family, with the lawyer. He's in the jail now with other political prisoners, and the European Human Court has a decision saying that it's not a trial, a fair trial. He's in prison, and he said an important text. I think is the point for the European Union. He say we all have to pursue a more patient and committed struggle to uphold democracy and human rights at both national and global levels. And he's asking us to freeze the negotiation, not to cancel or to suspend the negotiations. So the opinion of my group is to freeze the negotiations, to struggle in the defense of democracy, because Erdogan at the moment is a dictatorship.
Would that help? Would freezing the accession talks help? I mean, it seems like Turkey's not even that interested anymore in being a part of the European Union.
Well, look, there's an element within the Turkish elite that wants to be part of the European Union. They want to get hands on the money and the power that's influenced that. But there's another part that's saying, look, you've got to look at the changing fabric of our world. China is closest to us. The Middle East is closer to us. Russia is closer to us. And perhaps it's time for us, as Turkey, as a nation with a huge population, a very strong army, a really big military, to say that we could influence what goes on in the world. And I think that has more to do with this. He's saying, I am an equal to you. I'm not a supplicant to the European Union anymore. I don't necessarily need the European Union. You need me more than I need you. And therefore, I will continue to have the power in my country to make my country as strong as possible.
So basically what the EU can do is just talk, just warn Turkey, just say. So, I mean, yes, you can freeze accession talks, but what does that actually achieve?
Also protect the human rights, because the symbol is the Kurdish symbol, is the defense of human rights of the middle part of the country, the Kurdistan. And we have a lot of Kurdish and Turkish people living in Europe. So these people in the diaspora can influence also in the vote. They have local elections soon. And maybe Erdogan needs also a chance inside to influence also in the European Union. And in the European Union, we need to change all our dependent view with Turkey. I agree with him. Paying to stop the migrants is not a solution.
Yeah, and why do you think Germany's taking a harder line, it seems like, now in this state? Is it because of the kind of influence that Erdogan does have on the Turkish diaspora?
Of course he has influence on the Turkish diaspora. They are funding mosques throughout the European Union. They are helping establish what he regards as Muslim political parties, particularly those in Holland. He feels that he can use through money, his influence, to stretch into the politics of the European Union as well, which he thinks is perfectly legitimate for him to strengthen his own country.
Oh, they were disappointed.
Than that.
But it is rare to see him not in full control, wouldn't you say?
I don't think that we would have been able to see that video if he had fallen off. I think that footage would have been destroyed, let's face it.
I'm not sure they'd ever allowed us to have that at all.
I love your reaction, like, oh, big disappointment. That was the week that was. Join us again next week. We will be back in our studios in Brussels. Join us Monday, 6 p.m. CET, only here on Euronews.